Hello, you're listening to or watching the More Than Roommates podcast. I'm Dan.
And I'm Graham.
And today we want to celebrate Pride Month. It's been a great month. We actually got to walk in our first ever Pride Parade.
Together, yeah.
How was that?
It was fun. It was cool to represent and just be a part of, there are reasons why we march,
Yeah, for sure.
There's still legislation going into play that harms our community, so
Yeah.
we got to get out there and remind people what we're doing, right?
Yes. So last year was my...
Even though it's hot.
Oh
and
my gosh.
muggy. Oof.
Yeah, it was so hot. So
Yeah.
last year was our first time, or my first time, going to a Pride Parade.
Mhm.
And then this year we were able to actually walk in one, which was cool. But yeah, we were the
It
third.
was super cool. Yeah.
We were the third to last float.
That
And-
was so frustrating. Like, our email said we had to be there like by 10:45 or something at the latest. We waited 2 full hours before
We were
like
able to
we were
walk.
able to walk, and it was so miserable outside.
And then by that time, most of
it's
the crowd...
homophobic to be that
That
humid.
bad. Yeah, and then by that time, the crowd had dwindled, so it wasn't even...
It was still pretty good.
Mhm.
There was still a lot, but I'm sure like it's just too hot. You know,
Yeah.
people. That's a risk of doing stuff like that in June.
For
but
sure. But-
what else are you gonna do? It's Pride Month.
Yep. So it was fun overall. Very cool to see all those people, and people were wearing shirts like I'm a father of a gay son or stuff like that, and so that was just really cool to see.
Good to see the support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Allyship.
so today we wanted to talk about our coming out stories. Like, it's surprisingly something that we have not talked about prior. But do you want to kind of open up and share a little bit about what it was like when you came out?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I think about it, we're like constantly coming out. If we're being honest, like I was just talking to a couple colleagues about you yesterday.
Uh-oh.
And no, it was good. I just mentioned, my partner used to work for XXXX news station, and they're
Right.
like, "Oh, my husband used to watch that all the time." So her and I got chatting, and it was just cool. Like, I dropped your name, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I
Cool.
remember."
She remembered.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, so just like, I mean, sure, maybe people make presumptions about people, but I don't know. It's just like, it still feels like you are coming out in a sense. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, oh, this is my partner who's male,
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's not this big grandiose
Yeah.
announcement, but yeah, even I started a new job, and it's like, yeah, you gotta like kind of make the rounds, and it's not like, again, people are like, well, it's no one's business, but it is like, it's
Yeah.
when I talk about you, then it's like, oh, okay, I
Yeah.
didn't know that about him, but
Right. Yeah, it's coming out.
Right.
Literally. Like,
Yeah.
to people, that you haven't told. Maybe one day, society, it'll be like, oh yeah, this is my husband or my partner or whatever, and no one will bat an eye. But
Right.
people still, I feel like, they're like, oh,
yeah,
cool.
right.
But
So you weren't always out, right?
yeah, I mean, I don't think most queer people, of our age range were
Out.
always out. Some people maybe, but I definitely, tried to do my best to hide all that too. And I know when we talked in our podcast with Dorciana a little bit, how I, had a journal from when I was like 7, somewhere between like 7 and 9. And I talked about like having crushes on like a female, classmate and a male classmate, in grade school or whatever. So I knew from a very early age that, and that was even like pre-puberty, you know what I mean? It was before, really, you've got, before your sexual awakening, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But I came out to my friends like in college when I was probably somewhere between, I would say, 18 to 20. I figured, college seemed like a pretty inclusive space for the most part at the time, where I felt comfortable, and I had really close friends, which make a huge difference
Right.
for sure. And it was really cool and kind of relieving to like hear like a lot of my friends were like, oh yeah, like I kind of swing both ways too, or whatever, right?
Yeah, that is something I've noticed too. Is since I'm coming out, there's a lot more people that have confided that.
Yeah,
not-
it just
yeah.
I feel like people are maybe ready to be honest with themselves, and to an extent, like for me, it's letting go of the religious shame, from growing up, for sure. Like,
yeah. So
that wasn't like the most biggest topic, going to Catholic school. It was more like abortion and stuff like that, but it was still on the radar,
Yeah.
But,
So when you came out, was it something you were planning to do? Was it something in the
well,
moment?
Yeah, it was kind of just in the moment. Like we were just chatting, and it just kind of came up, I was just like, I think I had been holding that part back for such a long time that I just really wanted to like tell someone, to make it a little less lonely, I guess, because sometimes you feel like you're alone with your thoughts,
Yeah.
and like maybe growing up in a smaller, in the Midwest or whatever, you do feel alone in a lot of ways, like isolated, because a lot of people were hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
I feel like too.
Well,
But sorry.
You go first.
No, I was just gonna say. So that was like coming out number one
Mhm.
to friends.
Okay.
And then number two were my parents, and I actually came out on National Coming Out Day to my
Wow.
mom in October 2018. I think I was 28. It was actually pretty cool. I invited my mom for lunch, and she came up to my work, and like where I'm employed, like we have good views on diversity, and
Mm-hmm.
they make me feel comfortable, for sure. Like they give out pride pins and celebrate National Coming Out Day. So I thought, like this is the first place where I felt like I could be an authentic version of myself,
Okay.
and it just felt like the right time. So yeah, my mom and I had lunch, and I just kind of like told her, like, hey, I'm bi. Like I've always been this way, for as long as I can remember. And she just had questions, like it was pretty emotional, of course, like not in a bad way at all.
No.
Like it was like connecting on like a deeper level,
Mhm.
like I'm sure it meant a lot, for me to like have the courage to
Talk
tell
to her,
that
to be
too.
open.
Yeah. And then the third time I came out was with my dad. So I actually waited like another, I don't know, 6 to 8-ish months. And it was actually the last conversation I had when my dad was alive. And it was
Wow.
just, really like tough, like I
Mhm.
was like, I had this whole scenario built up in my head, like, because my dad grew up in like an even smaller town, like smaller school, different kind of mentality. And then he didn't grow up religious, but he did join the church, I think, like when he got married to my mom or something, and started practicing. And him and I went to church together, growing up a lot, pretty much every weekend. So I was worried. There's just a lot of like fear there, and just kind of like some of the comments, like that he would make, like I don't know if he was like really thinking. I think it just
That was the
a lot of it
culture.
is just, it's a culture, the way you're raised, the way people older than you talk, like it
Mhm.
forms your opinion, But so I was pretty nervous to talk to my dad, for sure. But like he had already had his health problems, and I had moved him in with me. He'd been living with me for quite a few months. He'd gotten back out on his own at that point, but like I felt like it was the appropriate time. Like I knew I would have regretted it deeply, like if because I thought I had already lost my dad almost at one point, like
Mhm.
a few months before that. So it, I kind of just had to weigh, both sides of it. Like, is it worth the risk? Like,
Of him not
I want
knowing.
him to know who I am,
So did it go well?
It did. It was, it was a little tough. Like, I don't want to say, like, he just didn't understand
Mhm.
completely. You know what I mean? Like, his opinions were very, like, straightforward for the most part, but he was very logical. He listened to me, like I feel like the first thing he said was, "Oh, dude, well, that's how you get an STD." And I was like, "Dad, I could get an STD from a woman too."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he was like, "Well, yeah, you're right." And just talked a little bit, we talked theology a little bit, and his views, even at that time, were starting to change. Like, he straight up had told me, he didn't really know what to believe anymore, and I think he always questioned the universe, I think,
Yeah.
seeking some kind of answer, but we hugged it out. We made plans. We were going to go visit, there's like a space museum in Hutchinson, Kansas. Okay. I think him and I went there I don't know, 20 some years ago when I was pretty young, and we had planned to go, and he passed before that, and it was just but I'm glad I got to hug him, and he told me he loved me, and it's just hard.
Yeah.
But that was definitely the scariest, kind of coming out for sure. But then that was just, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you talk too.
No, you're fine.
I just again with the levels of coming out.
Yeah.
So then this guy comes along a couple of years later, or a year later actually. It was 2020, and my dad, I had lost him, but you got kind of thrown into my family mix pretty quickly,
Mm-hmm.
with my mom, and I feel like this was the first time maybe I didn't necessarily come out. So my family, we love to do weekend family dinners on Sundays, just to kind of catch up, eat together, a nice meal, my mom usually makes, and I just brought him along with me, and I was like, "Oh, hey, my stepdad and stepbrother." I was like, "Hey, this is Dan."
Yeah.
And then then you got to meet, my step grandparents, and just kind of went from there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they were always accepting, so that was always good.
Yeah, he had that Star Street cred, the news guy.
Right.
He was gonna be mean to him with a little dimple chin.
God. I know. I shaved my.
I know.
So you can see my.
You got to tell him. Do we want to see the dimple more or more beard?
Yeah.
I like this is a good mix.
Yeah, I was definitely growing out the beard, but now I trimmed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So
you're gonna have to watch.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you're just gonna have to pause and take a little peek.
Yeah.
See what timestamp you're on now.
Yeah. So for my coming out, I knew from an early age that I was gay. And I was not raised in a very religious household. I was raised Catholic, but we didn't really go to church that often. But I've always wanted to know when I knew it was wrong, but because I don't know, no one sat me down and was like, being gay is wrong or a sin. But I guess that was just media at the time.
It's the people you grow up,
your
around.
Classmates. We were part of the Xbox Live, those trolls and
Halo,
what kids were saying. But I remember always early on, just praying at night, being like, I hope I wake up tomorrow and I'm not gay. I just hope. And then I guess at some point that was when I decided, I always loved journalism and I knew I wanted to be a reporter, but I thought it kind of went hand in hand that would be kind of my cover up, that I wouldn't have to be with someone because, I have such a successful career. I'm focusing on that. I'm always moving around. People wouldn't be it wouldn't be as obvious. And so I think that was a big reason into that. I wanted such a cool career that it wouldn't matter that I was single. Whether you're single or not, your value does not matter in your partner. But then I kind of later in life, when I realized I wanted to explore that side and eventually be with someone, I was like, okay, I don't really see the point in coming out until I've met someone. So when Graham and I started dating, I had not told a soul, which I also think is difficult. And if there's anyone out there listening that hasn't come out, I feel comfort now that there's so much more media that people can watch. But when we were little, there wasn't anything. No one sharing stories like this.
In the movies, everything was so biased.
Right.
The focus on very every gay man was super flamboyant
or
effeminate. And there's nothing wrong with that. don't get me wrong,
But
but
it made you feel like
it
if-
just gives people such a narrow view
Of what it is.
what it means,
or what your life could look
or what
like.
your life could look like.
And you know, we didn't have the internet as accessible, like, so you can just look up videos or TikToks. But so I wasn't out when I met Graham, and I eventually, it was the pandemic, so that also made it simple.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. I'm just thinking about the bombs you had to drop on your
Oh
parents
my
all at
gosh,
once.
I know.
Because
So-
it wasn't just
Yeah.
yeah.
So it was the pandemic, so it was very easy for me to kind of like hang out with him. No one was asking questions. No one was no one was seeing each other anyway.
And even if you remember for a little bit, like my parent, it was before they had met you too. Like we
Mhm.
were just like, oh, we're really scared of COVID. And we were scared of COVID at the
Yeah.
time. I didn't want to get my mom or anyone sick, you know.
Right.
But
So I remember my friend calling me, and we were just catching up, and I was just being very short and just like, oh, things are fine, nothing new, you know. And then as soon as I hung up, I was like, man, there's so much more I want to tell her. And so I immediately call her back, and I just came out, and she had the perfect response. So Kelly, if you're listening or watching, like, she invited me over. She had bought pizza and a bottle of champagne, and we popped the champagne and just had a great experience. So then eventually, like, one by one, I call family members, I call my brothers, and then I call my parents. Mainly the thing I got not pressured, but I had decided we were going to move in together. So I'm like, they need my
Surprise!
Parents and my parents are always involved in my life. So they've always known where I've lived and who I'm living with.
yeah, and they should.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely.
So I like call them, and I wasn't super nervous, and my parents, they've never really said anything like that would make it was just like something once you say it, you can't take it back. So I didn't feel the need until that moment. And I remember calling my parents, and I'm just like, hey, I've met someone, and it's a guy. And my mom was like, I've never said anything negative about that. I'm like, oh, I know. I'm like, I'm not like super scared right now. It's just, and then my dad was like, you know, I just want my kids to be happy. It doesn't matter who you're with. You live your life. And so they were very excited to meet you, and extended family. Everyone has been super accepting. So then I just started coming out to the rest. But I do have a little side anecdote. I actually was outed a little bit before I had come out to everyone. So
That's
I
tough.
had just come out to 2 friends, and so, you know, prior to meeting you, I was on dating apps, and I knew some people in my circles were gay, and I was always nervous that they would see me on those dating apps. But it never ended up happening. And, you know, once we started dating, of course, we deleted the apps. But I had told one friend, and she was at a pool party with other friends, and apparently one of the friends said, like, oh, I saw Dan on dating apps. And luckily they knew it at the time, and luckily I was in the headspace to start coming out. But that was hurtful, because me and this friend had been friends for years, and I was just like, why couldn't you have come to me with that information? Why did you just like hide it and then think that that was appropriate to share with other people? Because if it had been years prior and I wasn't ready, that could have been a whole different story. We've worked it out. We're still friends with this person, and I know they regret it. We've talked about it extensively. So there's no bad blood, but I think that is just a lesson for anyone out there, that if you know of someone's secret, maybe
you just got to be respectful with it,
yeah,
right?
it's
Like
not
you
something
said,
to
like
gossip about.
I heard a little bit of fear, like hurt, you know. I'm sure anger was probably
yeah.
a bit of it too. Like, it's kind of traumatizing, because
Yeah.
if you're not ready, you're not ready.
No.
And like you have to be ready.
Yeah.
You know? And that's, again, like the core of our podcast. Like, we want to put those feelers out there, you know, and kind of hope that we can maybe help some people come out.
Mhm.
But it still has to happen on your time.
Yeah,
for sure.
no one's
Like,
gonna pressure you to come out until you're ready, or no one should be, at
yeah.
least.
And especially, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I'm just going to say, especially, like, you know, you think back even probably 20 years ago, like, that was a good way to, like, ruin someone's career.
Mhm.
Like, maybe more so, like, mainstream, you know, media, or, like, actors and stuff, but
And you also don't
It's
know
true.
how their family would react, or if you
Yeah.
live in a small town, like, word travels fast. Obviously, it traveled fast here,
Yeah.
and
it just opens you up to stereotypes, and if you aren't mentally equipped to handle that and like be confident in who you are, then it could be a bad situation. And I mean, I don't want to be negative, but there's a very high, death rate, among LGBTQ people by, I'm saying death, but I think you know what I'm trying to say, by choice. It's just hard, like it's just such a complex thing to navigate and very tricky.
Yeah. But ultimately, I had a wonderful coming out experience. It was so exciting. Like once I got in the groove of coming out, like I came out to friends and coworkers, and it was exciting. Everyone was like, oh, I want to meet Graham and all of this. So if you're at home and you're thinking about it, I think every gay person says they wish they would have come out sooner. I certainly do. It would have made my life a lot easier, something I wouldn't have had to think about so much. Like I feel like if I think back about how much time I spent worrying about this, oh my gosh, I could have been the next neuroscientist. Like I would have had so much more time, but it all exactly like when you're ready, you're ready.
Yeah. And to that extent too, it does impact the way you grow up, like to hide in the shadows. And I don't know, I feel like to an extent you miss like a pivotal part of your life growing up, to be hiding, I guess, is tough for sure. But
yeah. Well, I think that will do it. I appreciate you guys for listening and hearing our stories. If you guys have stories or coming out stories, you want to message us or comment down below. We hope you're having a great Pride Month.
And today is Juneteenth. It would be remiss to not mention that too. So happy Juneteenth.
Yes, exactly. And so we will see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.